I never thought I would tell this story out loud, but it still lives in me like an old scar that sometimes burns when the weather changes. I was 7 years old the day my mother left me at the state children's home. She knelt in front of me, held my hands, and promised, "Just a couple of days, sweetie. I'll come back for you. Don't cry, okay?" I nodded because I trusted her. She was my whole world, the only family I had. And then she walked out the door and never came back. At first, I believed she had been delayed by something important. Maybe she got sick or had an accident. Maybe she was looking for a better home for us and would come to get me when everything was ready. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I ran to the window, expecting to see her smiling face. Every time the door opened, my heart leapt. But it was never her. Not that day, not the next week, not the next month. The other kids in the home told me bluntly she's not coming back. People don't bring kids here for a few days. But I refused to believe them. I waited 1 year, then 2, then 3, until I turned 18 and left the home for good. And even then, a small part of me still thought one day she might appear, apologize, and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. When I finally tracked her down because I couldn't let go without answers, I learned the truth. She had moved to another city, built a life without me, and never planned to return. She hadn't lost me by accident. She had abandoned me on purpose. That realization hit harder than anything I had experienced as a child. I was quiet, obedient, always tried to be good. So why wasn't I enough? Why didn't she want me? For a long time, that question haunted me. But instead of letting it destroy me, I turned it into fuel. If my mother didn't want me, I would build a life so full and so strong that no one could ever throw me away again. I studied harder than anyone else in school, graduated top of my class, and earned a scholarship to a university known for its design program. I had one goal: to become independent, successful, and untouchable. I rented a small government-subsidized apartment when I aged out of the children's home, and I renovated it myself. Every piece of furniture, every color on the walls, every tiny detail was mine, proof that I could create beauty out of emptiness. That apartment wasn't just shelter, it was a statement. I was no one's burden. I was enough. Yet, even in my busiest moments, I felt lonely. Friends? I had a few acquaintances, mostly from work, but I kept my walls high. There was one exception, Ethan Collins. He was the boy I had met at the children's home when I was 11, and he was 13, still raw from losing his grandmother, the only family he had. I remembered how he had stood alone in the courtyard, head down, while a group of older boys taunted him. I stepped in, trembling but fierce, and said, "Back off. Leave him alone, or I'm telling Mr. Henderson." They laughed but scattered because everyone knew Mr. Henderson didn't tolerate bullying. That was how Ethan and I became friends. Two abandoned kids holding on to each other in a world that seemed eager to forget us. We stayed close even after he left the home, and I remained behind. On weekends, he would visit me, and we'd sit on the bench under the old oak tree, sharing stories about what we'd do when we finally had our own lives. He wanted to design houses. I wanted to fill them with warmth and light. Back then, those dreams felt like the only thing keeping us alive. I didn't know then how deeply our bond would shape my life. I didn't know it would grow into something more, something that one day would feel like the family I thought I had lost forever. When I aged out of the children's home, I stepped into the world with nothing but a worn-out suitcase, a government-issued apartment key, and a stubborn determination not to become another sad statistic. That apartment was tiny, barely 400 square feet, with peeling wallpaper and an old heater that rattled like it might explode any second. But to me, it was freedom. It was proof I didn't have to wait for someone to choose me anymore. I spent weeks saving every penny from my part-time jobs to buy paint, secondhand furniture, and cheap tools. I stayed up late sanding floors, patching cracks, and repainting the walls in warm, earthy tones. When it was done, the apartment looked nothing like a place for someone who had grown up in a system. It looked like home. My home. University was my lifeline. I had earned a scholarship for interior design, something I'd fallen in love with as a teenager when I realized how spaces could influence how people feel, how they heal. I thought if I can't fix my past, maybe I can at least create spaces that make life feel better for someone else. And so I buried myself in my studies, learning about design principles, color psychology, and furniture layout, while working part-time in a design studio to pay for food and supplies. It wasn't easy. I was the quiet one in class, the one who didn't have parents dropping them off on move-in day or visiting on weekends. I watched classmates hug their moms and dads at graduation events and pretended it didn't hurt. But every time the pain surfaced, I channeled it into work. I became one of the top students in my program, known for designs that felt warm and lived in, like someone had finally come home. When I graduated, my professor recommended me for an internship at a well-known design bureau. That internship turned into a job offer, and suddenly I was working alongside seasoned designers on real projects: restaurants, boutique hotels, high-end homes. For the first time, I had a stable income, my own clients, and the respect of people who valued my talent. Outside of work, I kept my circle small. I had friendly colleagues, but no one I'd truly let in, except for Ethan. He was still there like he had been when we were kids, just in a different way. He had gone to college for architecture, and now he was working for a construction company. Sometimes we'd meet up after work, grab coffee, and talk about everything and nothing. Ethan had always been steady, calm, and thoughtful, the kind of person who didn't need to fill every silence with words. I trusted him, even when I trusted no one else. He didn't pity me, and he never made me feel like I was broken or incomplete. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I sat on my balcony and thought about how far I'd come. I had a career I loved, a home I'd built with my own hands, and enough savings to finally stop worrying about the next emergency. And yet, there was still this emptiness, a quiet voice in my head whispering, "This isn't enough. You still don't belong anywhere. You still don't have family." That night, Ethan called. "How's the queen of design?" he teased, his voice warm like it always was. "Exhausted," I admitted with a tired laugh. "But I'm okay. Work is good. Life is good, I guess." "You guess?" he asked gently. "Rachel, you deserve more than just okay. You deserve happy. You deserve someone who chooses you every day." His words sank into me like rain into dry soil. For so long, I had built my life around proving I didn't need anyone. But maybe I wanted to be chosen after all. At the time, I didn't know what Ethan truly felt for me. I didn't know how much our bond would shift in the months ahead, or how profoundly he would shape the life I was trying to build. I only knew that when he was around, the world felt a little less lonely, and I didn't have to keep pretending I was perfectly fine when I wasn't. The shift between friendship and something deeper didn't happen all at once. It crept in quietly, like sunlight slowly moving across a room. I began noticing the little things Ethan did, the way he always walked me to my car after late nights at work, the way he remembered how I took my coffee, or how he'd send me random pictures of buildings because he thought I'd like the design. One night, after a long work week, he invited me to dinner. "Just to celebrate," he said, smiling like he had some secret. I thought it was casual, the way we had done so many times before. I had no idea it would change everything. When I arrived at the restaurant, I froze in the doorway. Balloons floated near the ceiling, their ribbons curling down like golden vines. Flowers, soft pink roses, lined the tables. For a moment, I thought I'd walked into someone else's private event. Then I saw the sign on the table closest to the window, "Happy birthday, Rachel." I blinked, confused. "Ethan, what is all this? My birthday was 3 days ago." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his eyes warm. "But you worked that day and said you didn't want to do anything special. I thought you deserved something anyway." He led me to the center table, where a small velvet box sat among the roses. My heart started pounding. "Ethan," I whispered, "what did you do?" He smiled, but his voice trembled just enough to tell me how serious he was. "Rachel, We've known each other for most of our lives. You're the strongest person I've ever met and the most selfless. You've been my family when I didn't have one. I don't know what my life would look like without you, and I don't want to find out." So he opened the box. Inside was a delicate bracelet and attached to it a ring. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind flashed through every lonely night in the children's home. Every moment I'd told myself I didn't need anyone. Every brick I'd laid to build walls around my heart. And yet here was someone who had never left, who had stood beside me even when I pushed everyone else away. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." The restaurant erupted into applause, and Ethan wrapped me in his arms. It felt surreal, like stepping into one of those childhood dreams I'd never dared to say out loud. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in on other people's happiness. I was living it. The weeks after the proposal flew by in a blur of wedding plans, apartment hunting, and endless smiles. Ethan and I moved into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, with big windows and just enough space to dream about the future. Our wedding was simple but perfect. There were no parents to give speeches, no relatives flying in from distant cities, just a handful of close friends. One of my former professors and Mr. Henderson, the children's home supervisor who had once broken up that fight all those years ago. When I walked down the aisle, I saw Ethan standing there, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in my life I thought, this is what belonging feels like. Marriage with Ethan felt natural, like we had been preparing for it our entire lives. We cooked together, laughed together, and even started talking about starting a business together, combining his architectural skills with my interior design expertise. We called it Collins and Company. Design. For the first time since I was a child, I stopped waking up with that gnawing ache in my chest. I had a partner. I had love. And I had a future that finally felt like it was mine. I didn't know then how fragile that happiness could be, or how quickly everything can change with one violent twist of fate. Married life with Ethan felt almost unreal at first, like I had stumbled into someone else's dream. We had our little apartment on the edge of the city, sunlight spilling through the big windows every morning, and the hum of life outside reminding me that I finally belonged somewhere. Waking up next to him, cooking breakfast together before heading off to work. Those simple moments were everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd thought I might never have. Work had been going well for both of us, but one evening Ethan said something that made my heart race. "Why don't we do this together? You're incredible with interiors, and I'm good with structures. Why not open our own firm?" The idea terrified me. My whole life had been about stability, about never risking too much because I couldn't afford to fail. But looking at Ethan, his excitement contagious, I thought maybe this is what family does. They dream together. We took the plunge and started Collins and Company. Design, him handling architecture and structural plans, me focusing on interiors. At first, it was just the two of us, working late into the night, surviving on takeout and coffee. But slowly, clients started calling, thanks to word of mouth and Ethan's contacts from his construction work. One job became 3, 3 became 10, and before we knew it, we had to hire a small team. It wasn't easy. There were moments of stress, contracts falling through, clients changing their minds last minute, arguments about budgets and deadlines. Yet every night, when we collapsed on the couch together, we'd laugh and say, "We survived another day." And somehow, that made it all feel worth it. The business grew, and so did our life together. We talked about buying a house one day, something with a backyard, maybe even space for a dog. And, of course, we talked about kids. That was where things got complicated. Month after month passed, and nothing happened. I tried not to think too much about it at first, telling myself, it'll happen when it happens. But soon I started worrying. I went to a doctor just to be sure, and after a few tests, she smiled and said, "There's nothing wrong. You can have children. Sometimes it just takes time." Relieved, I came home and begged Ethan to get checked too. He resisted at first, saying it wasn't necessary, but when he saw how much it meant to me, he agreed. A week later, he walked into the apartment with an envelope in his hand and a soft smile on his face. "We're both fine, Rachel. It's just not time yet." We tried to believe that, but the truth is it wore on me. I'd look at him sometimes, imagining him holding a baby, and my chest would ache with longing. Still, we didn't let it consume us. Instead, we poured ourselves into our business and into each other. Every project we completed felt like a victory, a small piece of the future we were building together. By our third wedding anniversary, we had paid off our debts, bought a beautiful little home with wide doors and space to grow, and had a list of clients booking months in advance. We were proud, happy, and full of plans. Looking back now, I wish I could have frozen that moment, the joy, the love, the way I thought nothing could ever tear us apart. But life doesn't work like that, because one night on the way to celebrate Ethan's birthday and pick up the dress I'd ordered for the occasion, everything we had built, everything we had dreamed, came crashing down in a way I could never have imagined. The night it all changed was supposed to be perfect. Ethan had just turned 33, and I'd been planning a surprise dinner at his favorite restaurant. I had also ordered a new dress for the occasion, a deep emerald green one that hugged just enough to make me feel confident, but still elegant. After work, we planned to swing by the boutique to pick it up before heading to dinner. I remember feeling light that day, almost giddy, humming along to a song on the radio as Ethan drove. "You're in a good mood," he teased, his hand resting on mine. "Of course I am," I grinned. "My husband's birthday. I get to spoil you." He laughed, shaking his head. "Rachel, you do that every day." And then it happened. There was a flash of blinding headlights, a screech of tires, and the sickening crunch of metal folding in on itself. For a split second, it felt like time slowed, like I could hear every sound separately. The shattering glass, the deep groan of twisting steel, Ethan's voice shouting my name. Then pain. Hot, crushing, searing pain and nothing. When I woke up, the world was sterile white and humming with machines. My head pounded, and my mouth was dry, but the first thing I noticed was the stillness. I couldn't feel my legs. Panic clawed up my throat as I tried to move. Nothing. I tried again, harder this time, but it was like my body below the waist didn't belong to me anymore. A nurse appeared, rushing to my side. "Rachel, it's okay, you're safe. You were in an accident. Try to stay calm." "Where's Ethan?" I croaked, ignoring the pain in my chest. "He's fine," she assured me quickly. "Bruised and a mild concussion, but he's okay. You've had surgery on your back. The doctors will explain everything." Ethan was there not long after, sitting by my bed, holding my hand like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. He smiled through tears. "You scared me, Rachel. God, you scared me." "Ethan, my legs." "I can't feel my legs," I whispered. His smile faltered, his eyes glossing with fresh tears. "The doctors said it's too early to know the outcome. You need time to heal, to see what comes back. We'll figure it out together, okay?" But deep inside, I already knew. Something fundamental had shifted. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital rooms, physical therapy assessments, and endless, aching nights. My once strong, independent body was now something I didn't recognize. And though Ethan never left my side, feeding me, brushing my hair, holding me when I cried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost more than just my mobility. I'd lost who I was. One evening, I broke down completely. "Ethan, you don't deserve this," I said through tears. "You married someone who could stand beside you, not someone who can't even stand at all. You should leave me. Find someone else, someone whole." He cupped my face in his hands, eyes fierce. "Rachel Collins, you listen to me. I didn't marry you for your legs. I married you for your heart, for your soul, for everything you are. You are my wife, and I'm not going anywhere. Ever." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered, "This is too much. He'll get tired. He'll walk away just like she did." I swallowed that fear, trying to bury it, but it lingered like a shadow at the edge of every moment. And I had no idea how much darker that shadow would become. Recovery was supposed to be about hope, about small victories that add up over time. That's what the therapist said, what the nurses repeated like a mantra. But to me, recovery felt like watching someone else live my life while I sat still, useless and trapped inside my own body. I went through surgery after surgery, each one promising a chance to regain what I'd lost. Metal rods, endless physical therapy sessions, injections, nerve tests. My life became a string of procedures and waiting rooms. For a while, I clung to the idea that if I just worked hard enough, I could get back to where I was before the accident. But each day bled into the next, and my legs remained silent, numb like they didn't belong to me anymore. Then came the tumor. It was a small growth near my spinal cord, benign but complicated. The doctors told me it was most likely a result of scar tissue and trauma. More surgery, they said. More recovery. More pain. Something inside me broke at that moment. No more, I whispered to the surgeon, tears stinging my eyes. I'm done. No more surgeries. I can't live like this anymore. When I came home from the hospital that day, Ethan tried to reason with me. Rachel, don't give up now. You're stronger than this. We can beat this thing together. I shook my head. I don't have it in me anymore, Ethan. I'm tired of being cut open, tired of hoping for something that never comes. I just want to be home, in peace, however long I have. He nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. And that's when things between us began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Ethan started working late more often. At first, it made sense. We still had our design business, clients depending on us. But soon it felt like he was avoiding me. I'd hear his car pull in after midnight, or sometimes not at all. When I asked, he'd say he fell asleep at the office, too tired to drive home. I tried to believe him. I told myself he was just stressed, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, my injuries, our business, the life we'd built now teetering on shaky ground. But that little voice inside me whispered louder with each passing day, he's slipping away. He's leaving you, just like she did. And I hated myself for thinking it because he was still kind, still patient when he was home. He'd bring me flowers, make me tea, sit with me while I cried at night. But there was a distance in his eyes sometimes, like he was looking at me and seeing the life he'd lost instead of the woman he'd married. One evening, as I sat in my wheelchair by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, I realized I was crying without even noticing it. I had been here before, this feeling of waiting for someone to come back, someone who might never truly return. And I thought, maybe this is what I deserve. Maybe I was never meant to be someone's forever. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and an ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I didn't tell Ethan how deep it went, how I feared he was already halfway gone. Instead, I smiled when he left for work and told him to be careful, just like I used to do back when life was normal. But inside, I was bracing for the moment he would stop coming home altogether. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Ethan had already left for work, and I hadn't scheduled any therapy visits. I wheeled myself to the door and opened it, expecting maybe a delivery. Instead, there stood a man I had never seen before, late 50s, salt and pepper hair, eyes that looked strangely familiar. "Rachel Collins," he asked gently. "Yes, can I help you?" I answered cautiously. He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself. "My name is Dr. Thomas Green, and I'm your father." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My father? The man I'd been told didn't exist? My mother had always insisted she raised me alone, that my father wasn't someone I needed to know about. She never even said his name. I laughed, sharp, nervous, bitter. My father? That's impossible. My mother said, "I didn't know about you," he cut in, his voice shaking slightly. "Rachel, I swear to you I didn't know. I only found out 2 months ago, when your mother reached out to me before she passed." The mention of her stopped me cold. My mother gone? After all those years of silence, all those unanswered questions, she had died without ever facing me. Thomas continued. She told me everything. She told me she left you at the children's home and that she regretted it every day. She asked me to find you, to tell you she was sorry. I stared at him, trying to process everything. Why now? Why after all these years? Because I'm your father, and I didn't know I had a daughter, he said, his voice breaking. I can't change what she did, but I can try to be here now if you'll let me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door and never look back. How dare he come into my life after everything? But another part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime aching for family, wanted to believe him. Finally, I asked, "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he said simply. "Only to know you, to help if I can. I'm a physical rehabilitation doctor. I heard about your accident. I think I can help you regain some mobility if you trust me enough to let me try." I almost laughed again. Help me walk? After everything the other doctors had said? It sounded too good to be true. And yet there was something in his eyes, a mix of guilt, hope, and an odd familiarity that made my chest ache. "Why would you even care?" I whispered. "Because you're my daughter," he said, his eyes shining. "And I already wasted too much time not being there for you. Please, Rachel, let me try to make up for that in any way I can." I let him in. For the next hour, he explained his work, how he'd specialized in spinal injury rehabilitation for decades, how he believed the right combination of therapy and patience might help me regain partial use of my legs. I listened quietly, not knowing if I dared to hope. When he left that day, he gave me his card. "I'll be in town for as long as you need me. Call me if you're willing." After he was gone, I sat in silence, staring at the card in my hand. My father. After 30 years of believing I had no one but Ethan, there was suddenly another branch on the family tree. Someone who claimed he wanted me, not out of obligation, but because he chose to. That night, I lay awake long after Ethan came home, still hearing Thomas's words. For the first time in months, something in me stirred, a fragile, dangerous thing I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've lived most of your life without it. For weeks, I met with Dr. Green, my father, though I still stumbled over the word, working through exercises I hadn't believed were possible. His approach was different, slower, more deliberate, focused on muscles other doctors had given up on. And something miraculous began happening. I could feel tingling in my thighs, small sparks of sensation that had been absent for months. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting session, I called Ethan. He didn't answer. I assumed he was busy, so I left a message. "Hey, just finished therapy. It's working, Ethan. I think I'm really going to walk again." My voice cracked from the weight of the words. But Ethan came home late that night, looking tense, his jaw tight. He didn't ask about therapy. He barely looked at me. "What's wrong?" I asked, rolling toward him in my chair. He hesitated, then said, "Who's Thomas?" I froze. "Thomas is my father. I told you." "No, Rachel. You didn't tell me much of anything. You just said some doctor offered to help. You didn't say he was your father. A man I've never heard of. A man who suddenly shows up and takes you to private sessions every other day." My chest tightened. "Ethan, it's not like that. He didn't even know I existed until recently. He's just trying to help, really?" His voice was sharp, unfamiliar. "Because from where I'm standing, you've been spending a lot of time with some stranger, telling him things you don't tell me. I'm your husband, Rachel. Or did that change when I wasn't looking?" Anger flared in me, hot and painful. "How dare you? This is about me trying to get my life back, Ethan. About me not being a burden to you anymore." "You were never a burden," he snapped, but his eyes betrayed him. There was exhaustion there, years worth of it. I don't know what's going on anymore. You shut me out, Rachel. And now there's this man, this father who conveniently shows up when you're at your weakest. Forgive me if I'm suspicious. I couldn't breathe. After everything, after my mother, after the accident, after all those nights wondering if Ethan would leave me, this felt like betrayal wrapped in accusation. Get out, I said softly. He blinked. What? Get out, I repeated, louder this time, my hand shaking. If you can't trust me, if you think I'd do something like that, you need to leave. Because I can't do this with you looking at me like I'm some stranger you regret marrying. He stood there for a long moment, his face torn between anger and regret. Finally, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. I sat in my chair, tears blurring my vision, my chest aching like my ribs might crack open. All the old fears came rushing back. He's leaving, Rachel. Everyone leaves eventually. Hours passed before I heard another knock on the door. I opened it to find Thomas standing there looking concerned. Rachel? Are you okay? I broke then. I collapsed forward, sobbing into the chest of a man I'd only known for a short time but who was undeniably my blood. He thinks I'm having an affair, I choked out. Thomas stiffened, then pulled back to look at me. An affair? With me? I nodded helplessly. He sighed, shaking his head. Rachel, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I should have come to meet him, explained everything from the start. The sound of the door opening cut him off. Ethan stood there, eyes wide, his face pale. He'd come back, just in time to see me leaning on Thomas, crying. Rachel, Ethan's voice cracked. What is this? And before I could explain, he strode across the room and shoved Thomas backward. Stay away from my wife. Stop! I screamed, pushing my chair forward. He's my father, Ethan. My father. The room fell silent except for my ragged breathing. Ethan froze, looking at me like he'd just been punched. Your father, he whispered. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. The man you thought I was cheating with is my father, the one I never had, the one who's trying to help me walk again. Ethan stumbled back, horrified, his voice barely audible. Oh God, what have I done? Ethan stood there frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling as if he didn't know what to do with them. For a long moment, no one spoke. I wiped my eyes, still shaking, and whispered, You thought I would do that to you? After everything we've been through. Ethan's eyes closed, and when they opened again, they were full of regret. Rachel, I was wrong. I let my fear and frustration get the best of me. I felt you slipping away, and instead of asking why, I accused you. I'm so sorry. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how deeply his words had cut. But when I looked at his face, at the man who had stood by me through pain and despair, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion and fear. The same fear I'd carried for months, that I wasn't enough, that I was losing everything. Thomas stepped forward gently, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You love her. I can see that. But love isn't about control or suspicion. It's about trust and showing up when it's hardest. His voice softened. I failed Rachel once, a long time ago. I'm not going to fail her again. Don't make the same mistake I did. Ethan's eyes welled up and he turned to me. Rachel, can we fix this? Can I make this right? I hesitated, then nodded slowly. Only if you listen this time. Only if you trust me. He knelt in front of me, taking my hands. I do, and I'll do better. I promise. That night, the three of us sat together, awkward at first, then slowly unraveling years of silence and misunderstanding. I told Ethan everything about Thomas, how he hadn't known about me, how he was trying to give me back more than just movement. He was trying to give me a piece of the family I'd always longed for. Ethan listened, really listened, and something shifted. From then on, he came to my therapy sessions, not just watching but helping, holding my waist as I tried to balance, encouraging me when pain made me want to quit. And for the first time since the accident, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like part of a team. Thomas kept his promise too. His methods were exhausting, sometimes even brutal, but little by little my body responded. Muscles that had been dormant for months began firing again. The first time I managed to stand for a full 30 seconds without support, Ethan clapped like a kid, tears streaming down his face. "This is only the beginning," Thomas said with a proud smile. And he was right. Within months, I could take small, shaky steps with a walker. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it was progress. It was proof that I could have a life beyond the wheelchair, a life where I didn't have to be defined by what I had lost. Through it all, something beautiful happened. Ethan and Thomas built their own bond. What started as tension slowly became mutual respect. They'd sit on the porch after therapy sessions, talking about architecture, about family, even about forgiveness. One evening, Ethan turned to me and said, "Your dad's pretty great." It was the first time he'd called Thomas my dad, and it made me smile through tears. There was healing happening everywhere, not just in my body, but in our hearts. And it wasn't just us. Thomas had grown close to Margaret, my part-time nurse who had been helping me since the accident. She was warm, kind, and had this quiet strength that drew people in. One day, out of nowhere, Thomas announced, "Margaret and I were getting married." We celebrated like a family should, laughing, crying, and feeling whole in a way I hadn't believed possible just months before. Looking back, I realized something important. Healing doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it isn't just about standing on your own feet. It's about letting people stand with you, about building something new out of what you thought was broken forever. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of a small garden, filled with white chairs and soft music drifting on the breeze. It was my father's wedding day. Thomas stood near the altar, looking nervous in a perfectly tailored suit, while Margaret adjusted her bouquet with tears already forming in her eyes. I tightened my grip on the walker, my heart pounding. Not because of nerves, but because today was the day I would take my first steps in public since the accident. I could have stayed in my wheelchair and no one would have judged me. But this wasn't just about walking. It was about showing myself that I had moved beyond fear, beyond shame, beyond everything that had once held me down. Ethan stood beside me, his hand warm on mine. "Ready," he whispered. I nodded. My legs trembled, but I lifted one foot, then the other. The music swelled, and people gasped softly as I took step after step down the aisle. They weren't perfect steps, shaky, slow, deliberate, but they were mine. By the time I reached the altar, Thomas's eyes were wet. He hugged me tightly, whispering, "You made it, Rachel. You really made it." The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. There were no grand speeches about second chances or redemption, but it was in every detail. The way Thomas looked at Margaret, the way Ethan held my hand, the way my own heart felt steady and whole for the first time in years. After the vows were exchanged and applause filled the garden, Ethan leaned close to my ear. "Do you realize what you just did?" he asked. I laughed, tears spilling over. Walked down an aisle for someone else's wedding. "You walked into your future," he whispered. And he was right. That night, as we sat under a canopy of string lights, surrounded by family we never thought we'd have, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not for the pain I'd endured, not for the abandonment of my childhood, not even for the accident, but for what had come after. For the people who showed up and stayed. For a father who refused to waste the second chance he'd been given. For a husband who learned to fight alongside me instead of against me. I thought back to the girl I used to be, the one waiting by the window of a children's home for a mother who never came back. She had been lonely, scared, and convinced that love was something she had to earn. I wanted to tell her, it's going to hurt before it heals. But one day, you'll find people who love you not because you're perfect, but because you're theirs. As the night came to a close, Ethan wrapped his arm around me, his voice soft. "Do you regret any of it? Even the hard parts?" I shook my head. "No, because it brought me here. To you. To him. To this family." I paused, feeling the cool night air on my face, and whispered, "Forgiveness didn't change my past, but it gave me a future." For the first time in so long, I believed those words. The pain hadn't vanished. The scars were still there, physical and emotional. But they were no longer chains, they were reminders of what I had survived and what I had built afterward. I wasn't that abandoned little girl anymore. I wasn't the broken woman in the wheelchair wondering if anyone would stay. I was Rachel Collins, daughter, wife, survivor, and someone who had finally learned how to stand, not just on my own 2 feet, but in my own life. As the lights dimmed and laughter echoed around me, I smiled, knowing this was only the beginning of a life I never thought I'd get to live. And for the first time, it didn't scare me to move forward because I wasn't moving forward alone.